And we're live. I think, Daphne, you said today we're going to talk about things that we never talk about.
Yeah, that sounds really edgy, doesn't it?
So we're talking about religion, politics, and sex today.
Sex. We both got to that one pretty quick.
We know what people don't want to talk about.
Yeah, those are some of the topics for sure. Well, I think the religion and politics people seem to talk about fairly freely.
Yeah,
too much.
Not too much respect, unfortunately.
Yes, probably said better. And sex. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. Sex in the workplace.
Okay. Oh. That does not sound like an appealing topic for me. I might let you do a solo hosted episode on that topic.
You can show up and just sit there.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Well, no, today we are going to talk about what I feel is a necessity in our lives that includes the things of the humanities, I would say. Nature, art, philosophy, music, books I could put in there, writing, I guess. So we're going to talk about the day and how we need those things in our life. Like, I find them to be necessities in living an exceptional life.
Welcome to Life, the ultimate choose-your-own adventure game with hosts Cliff Ravenscraft and Daphne Scott. Join this dynamic duo as they explore the profound concept of life as a thrilling adventure, blending ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Embrace the joy of living with presence, creativity, and playfulness. It's time to navigate the game of life together. Are you ready to play? Let the adventure begin.
Are you ready to play? That's what I picked up on today.
I am, and I picked up on creativity and playfulness.
Nice. Yeah. So what are these essential elements for the life of Daphne and where did this come from?
Yeah. So I was invited to write a letter to my nephew. So I have a nephew who's graduating this year from high school. And I sat with sort of what would I want to write? I think there's sort of like, I could try to impart wisdom, to him, which I think is a little, maybe he would, if he were asking for it, maybe I would have gone that direction. That wasn't really, so I just started letting myself write. And the first thing I landed on was, something about going for a walk in nature. Like, I have found that is something that I enjoy doing to clear my head. I kind of wrote it that way. And so long story short, I landed on sort of these 3 stories about things that had influenced me. And I guess I'll share some of them. So one was taking a walk in nature. The second was the photography of Stephen Shore. So he did a couple books, one in particular, Uncommon Places, which if you look through the book, his photography, the pictures are amazing. They look like very common places. It's like a standard gas station, or one that I called out specifically, a telephone booth next to a cactus, which ironically, this book, all the photography was published in 1982, which ironically now a phone booth, seeing one of those would be a very uncommon thing. So, right in our modern times. And then the third part that I wrote about was really philosophy, sort of the idea, sharing the ideas of what it has meant for us to move from, an aristocracy to a meritocracy, and sort of the things that came along with that we hadn't really been prepared for so much. Like we all can be successful. And we've talked about this a little bit on the show, and what that's done to the idea of status and what it means if we're not successful now. There's some moral failing that we have. So there were those 3 buckets, and I wrote about those things. And so as I was putting the show together today, I thought, art, and by the way, I also just came back from New York City. I was there last weekend. I love going there because I love going to the museums. And Nan Golden, who we can talk about, had her first exhibit there. She is very much known in the photography world for sort of documenting in the 70s, early 70s, the gay and lesbian life and what was happening in New York at the time, which no one was talking about these things, and it was very underground. And her photography brought a bit of humanity to what was going on at that time. And then she had several exhibits. She's, in the Guggenheim. But one of the most recent things that she did is she created an activist movement regarding the opioid crisis, and with the Sackler family in particular. and was really a big voice to have their name removed. They had their name on a lot of these art institutions, and where they had gotten the money was really from the opioids. So you can watch all this on Netflix, by the way. Anyway, she had an exhibit, her most recent exhibit in New York. So I went to see that, and then just spent time in the Met, and just the influence that art has to, as a humanity, and to help us see our humanity.
So what stood out to me is the very first phrase that you spoke. I was invited to write a letter to my nephew for his graduation.
Yeah.
And I have a question for you. Who invited you? I'm curious about that part of the story.
Yeah, well, it was his mom, my sister-in-law, but it's a thing that they're doing with the school with the seniors who are on their football team.
I love that. That for me is there's something in that element, and there's something of value in a life lesson just in that alone. An invitation to write a letter.
Yeah. Yeah, a letter. When's the last time you wrote a letter?
Well, I'm reading a book right now called Giftology. Have you heard of Giftology?
I have not.
It is a book. Let's see here. I've got it pulled up because it's on my Kindle right now. John Ruhlin, I think, Ruhlin, and it's called Giftology: The Art and Science of Using Gifts to ... It goes off the screen, but anyway, it is about how to show appreciation for people by giving gifts, to show that you value who they are, the sacrifices and investments of time, effort, and energy they make to being a part of your life and or your business. And so it is this art. And one of the things that's in here is like, listen, if you're in a place in your business where giving extravagant gifts that show lavish appreciation for the people you work with, never underestimate the value of a handwritten note or letter.
Yeah.
And in many cases, you would be much better served to send a handwritten note or letter than some very inexpensive throwaway gift.
That's so good. I had a dear friend, who spent a year writing handwritten letters to all of the people that he worked with.
Yeah. What stood out to me, have you seen the biopic of Mr. Rogers that was done by Tom Hanks?
Yes.
And that's something that stood out to me, just how much care he gave and how much appreciation for each individual human that he interacted with. That I loved the fact that he would take these pictures and have them developed, and he would write in his journal about his experience, and he would pray for those people, and then he would make telephone calls and write handwritten notes and letters.
Yeah, just that alone. I mean, that's art in and of itself. Humanity.
It very much is, and I bring that up because your first statement, I was invited to write a letter.
Yeah.
And there's something so profound about the idea and the concept of sitting down with a blank piece of paper, without the autocorrect, without the highlighting and asking AI to make it sound prettier. It's just like, what do I want to communicate to this person with this writing instrument and this piece of paper? It's profound.
Well, I think that I love writing. I do. And to me, it is exactly just as you described. It's painting with words to me. Right. Or even writing music. It's a similar, I think I was sharing with you, or maybe I said it on the show. I was watching an interview with, it was LL Cool J, and he said, I paint on silence.
I remember you saying that. Yes.
Yeah. When he was writing music. So yeah. And what's really fun for me, I think, in the creative space of writing is I really had no idea what I was going to write about. I just started writing. I had no idea what I was going to say to him, or really zero clue. I said, just start writing, just see what happens. And it was like this thing just blossomed. And I'm like, oh, you're telling him 3 stories of things that impacted you. And then I worked backwards from there. I'm like, how would I encapsulate this? Like, I wrote a story about a walk in nature. I specifically talked about the mallard duck, what it is to see a mallard. And, and then I could pull some pieces from, my knowledge base to kind of round that out a little bit. But it just, I talked about John Audubon, and he painted the picture of a mallard, and, it's in his book, American Birds. And, and so I kind of went and backfilled some of the things to add a little bit, kind of like building a house, like put pictures on the wall type of thing. But I really had no idea what I was going to write. And then I was like, oh, you're just telling him 3 stories. And relating it back to living a good life. And I think that's what really brought this show together. It's like having these things in our life, music, art, and, whatever it is, whatever art form you enjoy. It could be writing and that creative expression, and then appreciating what others bring forth is just such a gift.
So you gave us the title of this episode, The Essentials of Life. And there are 3 that are in the title. There's nature, there's art, there's philosophy. Do you want to go in that order?
Sure.
So let's.
Nature, art, beauty. I left off music off the title, which I found ironic.
Okay. Well, music, I thought music would be an art.
Yeah, it is. I guess art could be everything.
Yeah, I guess it could be.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go in that order.
So actually, it was nature, art, and beauty. How did I get philosophy out of that? Because I'm pretty sure philosophy was inside of the outline as well.
It's in there. It's probably in the notes.
All right. Well, you take the lead. How's that sound?
Okay, that sounds good. Well, and here's part. I also want to say, here's what I will. Thank you. And I also want to say, part of why I'm bringing this up. You and I we work with people who are business leaders, running their own business, people working in organizations, and we talk quite a bit, I would say, about what it means to have success in your business, what it means to have success in your life. And we spend a lot of time talking about that through the eyes of work. I think that's fair to say that. And on this show, we've been talking about all the things not related to that directly, right? All the other sorts of elements of living a meaningful, good life in playing this game of life, right? And choosing your own adventure. And I thought this topic today, when we talk, there's just some sort of a strange juxtaposition to put the idea of art, music, creativity up against this idea of being an achiever and up against this idea of success. And I was curious about your thoughts about that, because even when I was putting the outline together, I had this moment of like, oh, these things almost seem opposed to one another in some sort of a way. So I wasn't. And I'll tell you what the phrase that I landed on, which I think you're going to find sort of interesting, because I remembered this Bible verse about the lilies not toiling or something.
Yeah, the scripture where Jesus says, "Don't worry about what you will eat, what you will drink. Don't worry about anything. Look at the lilies of the field. Look at the birds. They don't toil, and yet see how they're cared for."
Yes. And I thought there's something in the world of our artistic expression, I think, that can help us see that and help bring that forth in our own life, where we're trying to achieve, we're trying to be successful, we're trying to get to the next thing. There's all this striving. And as usual, Jesus nailed it. I think that's what art can help us see too. So that's some of where I was linking this up in our sort of context in which we talk.
So for me, as I think about that, I definitely see, okay, for me, success in life is not only work, and that's what we try to help people understand, because it does get caught up. A lot of people think I am a success if I have a certain amount in the bank account, if I own a certain number of possessions, if I hold a certain level of status or power in the eyes of others, that's what success is. When in reality, that can be success, and that can be our reality if we choose it.
Yeah.
And we can feel really great as long as we have those things. The only thing is that so much of that is outside of our control.
Yes.
At least the more we get of it, there is the striving and the effort and the sacrifice that it takes to attain that level of success. And then once one has it, it's not just the fact that you attained it, but it's the protecting and not losing of it that becomes a real, for me, I observe a lot of stress in that. I've experienced a bit of stress in that.
Yeah.
I sometimes still do experience a bit of stress in that.
Yeah. I mean, it is that sort of, I got it, now I got to hang on to it. Right now I can stress myself out about that. And so I think that music and art, all the forms of art, I guess I'll say philosophy, philosophy originally was all about, what is it? Questioning, right? The examined life. I mean, that's what Socrates really talked about, right? What life, living an unexamined life isn't worth living. I'm paraphrasing. But that's essentially what he said. And originally that was the intent of philosophy, was to bring us to sort of a greater awareness of what does it mean to live a meaningful life, to live a good life. And Socrates landed on, developing our character and our virtue was the most important thing. And that's where we kind of lost the plot there as we became a more modern society. I mean, all the things you just talked about, right? Well, now really what makes me successful isn't my character and virtue in life, or having a life of meaning that way. It's how many material possessions can I get my hands on? How big of a house can I afford? And so we kind of got a little caught up in that, and I think still can if we're not careful, because it's easy to measure that. It's harder to measure your character and virtue, I think.
Right. And the question I have when I think about that line of thinking is, who is the one doing the measuring?
Yeah, great question. Who is the one?
So
who's the one noticing anything?
When it's harder to measure one's success, whether it be based upon positions and power and all that other stuff, or is it easier to measure one's character and values and stuff like that? Who's doing the measuring? That's my question. And for me, I'm getting more and more to the place where the only one who's, as far as I'm concerned, is when it comes to the measure of my success, it's how I determine success and define it for myself. And while there are definitely parts of my personality that desire to be validated and affirmed by others, I find that the more I lean into that side of my personality, the more suffering I experience in life, because I get misperceived on my intentions or my, ways of doing things or saying things. And it's like, who cares? At the end of the day, I care what I think about my success in life.
Yeah. Well, that's why you're a weirdo.
I am a weirdo.
And now we're back to art. And so art, the humanities, I guess that'd probably be a better word to use because it encompasses all of it. And I loved what you're talking about. And as you were talking, Cliff, I was kind of in my head a little bit around what is it that we see that allows us to sort of stand in that space, to stand in the space against. And I think this is what art, all of history, all of mankind, there has always been some expression, some artistic expression, to help us get in touch with that part of our humanity, to get in touch with that part of us that says, look, I see very clearly what society at large is trying to tell me, or what has been propagated as meaning that I'm going to be fit in, I'm going to be successful in some way. And through the humanities, we get a sense of like, oh, but what is it to really be human? And what is it for me to just be human on this earth? What is it for me to matter on this planet, regardless of how much money I make, or regardless of the status that I have, regardless of the title that I walk around with? What does it really mean for me to matter and just be here? And the image that came was this, it was a painting, and it was this, I'm trying to remember who the artist is, it'll come to me, but it was Despair was the title. And it was just this man with his hands in his head, and just seeing that image of just, the despair that we can go through when we're living my relation to this image was the despair that we can feel when we're living a life that we're not aligned to live, or when we're falling prey to the trappings of what modern society says we should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And who can't relate to that experience, that emotion? So I think that's the gift that the humanities can bring to us. One of the gifts is that we're not quite so alone.
Yeah.
Right.
When I think of art, there's and this is a perception of mine. I don't know if it has any basis in reality. I've not done any research on this. I've not done any study of it. But in my mind growing up, my conditioned way of thinking of art is that thing that you do where it's not for the money. It's not for the fame. It is an expression of who you are. Now, some people get paid for their art. Some people become well-known, and there's this philosophy that I've learned to live by, and it is find something that you love to do so much that you would be willing to do it all day long for free. And if you become so excellent at doing that thing, eventually people might be willing to pay you to do it.
Yeah.
And in I kind of equate that philosophy, that line of thinking, to the idea of what is my art? What is my expression? And for me, one of my arts is communicating with words, sharing thoughts out loud without any premeditation. What comes flowing through my experience of a given topic or an experience? How am I relating to the things of life? And putting words to the experience, that to me is my art.
Oh, it's a huge art. I mean, that's some of the art that also comes through with writing. But I love the question that you just put in there. It's like, what is my art? Like, what is my artistic expression? And I think what you've just done too, that I think is really important, is that you paint with words, and I'm using paint as a metaphor now, right? So you're painting with words, and I think one of the missteps that we can make is putting art in a very specific bucket. Like, oh, I almost did it. You're like, but isn't music art? Like, yeah.
Well,
it's,
even that. So do you know how many people says, Cliff, when are you finally going to write a book? And I'm like, I've written thousands.
Yeah, already.
And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, have you ever listened to an audiobook? I have 4,800 of those.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not in a written form, right?
Right. If you want, I can go get them all transcribed and put them on dead trees if you want, and we'll call it a book.
Yeah. That's so funny, because if you read any books where they said it was the Buddha, I mean, the Buddha never wrote anything down.
Right.
Ever. It was all things that, like, talks that people had heard him given. They wrote it down. Isn't
that fun? And it mixes that idea of philosophy. That's how philosophy was expressed, through oral tradition.
Yes, very much so. I mean, there were barely written words. I mean, the printing press was what, 1800 or something, or maybe earlier? No, it was earlier, way earlier. But yeah, I mean, that didn't always exist. So there really was only one way to transmit messages, really. Talking, which we're doing right now. This is our art form. Well, I guess that's it.
Well, let's talk about why is it essential? What makes art, beauty, and nature essential in our lives?
Yeah. So first of all, it is through these expressions that we get in touch with our humanity. I think the first part of this, at least for me, when I really was drawn to music and really drawn to listening to music, that's probably the first art form that I really got in touch with very quickly at a very young age. And then I got further into reading philosophy, and then further into other humanities. Law, by the way, is a humanity, one of the humanities. Anyway, I think the first part of it is that there was a sense of not feeling quite so alone. I think that was the biggest thing. There was a way that I could listen to a musician or listen to a piece of music and not feel so alone. And then the second part, and I did not realize they had a name for this, which I'll share in a second. They have a name for this, but there was also the second part of this, is there was a visceral response that I would have often, especially to music. And then and I would see certain images, and I could feel it in my body. So I think the second part of the necessity of these humanities is that we can get in touch even at a deeper level with ourselves, not just through our mind, but also through our heart and through our body. They have a name for some of this visceral response, and it's called Stendhal Syndrome, which I think is really funny, because syndrome implies sort of this like static thing to me, but I'll give you the definition. It's the psychosomatic condition, so your mind and your body condition, involving rapid heartbeat, fainting, confusion, even hallucinations, allegedly, when individuals become exposed to objects, artworks, or phenomena of great beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of my first experiences where I can very clearly remember having a visceral response was the first time I went to see the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And it was before I was 30, so I was probably 28. And I will never forget the overwhelming feeling and the tears that welled up just hearing them. I don't even remember what piece of music it was. It was literally that effective, what somebody has defined as Stendhal Syndrome. But it was very visceral. I mean, tears welled up, and I had a similar response the first time I ever heard the band Rush, which is like my all-time favorite band.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What stands out to me about music is the idea of resonance and
Yes.
the frequency of sound.
Yes.
And the picture that comes up to my mind, and this is one of the ways that I can relate the idea and the concept of essential to life, the idea of art, music as an art being essential to life, is how it can cause people to resonate with one another who might be dissonant otherwise.
Yeah. The
So-
collective happy, right?
Exactly. So
yes.
for me, I think about music vibrates at different frequencies, different sounds. And if we can get in tune with, in resonance with that, and we feel a state of flow, we feel a state of euphoria with that music. And collectively, if we get around other people who are also experiencing that resonance, that overall, we've got a collective group of people, and it could be in the tens, hundreds, thousands, or more. And then all of a sudden, it's like we have people who are in this crowd of, let's just say, 20,000 people in a stadium or whatever. This is a group of people where individually, so many of these people might absolutely dislike and at some level hate each other.
Yeah.
But they don't know each other, and they're sitting next to each other in a stadium and resonating at the same level with a particular song, a particular melody. And these two are, it brings about a sense of oneness among the crowd. And that is something that I love. It breaks down for me, though, when the person creating that art form then takes some sort of political message that is, to them, and then all of a sudden it can break down the resonant chord of that art form for me. So and who am I to judge what they choose to do with their what is the call, awareness of, or the becoming their voice or whatever.
Well, it's very tricky when you start wanting to have a message behind art, right? That is the tricky part for artists, because they, there's interpreting things for people. It can be very dicey.
But I mean, I think of just like the song Dancing Queen.
Yeah.
Do you know how many tens of millions of people over the last decades, you put that on, and everybody I've seen videos on TikTok, for example, in France, where one side of the subway station, somebody starts singing Dancing Queen. And before you know it, the entire station is singing Dancing Queen. And these are, and of course, this is a station representative of multiple countries, multiple different languages, and everybody is there having the most amazing time singing Dancing Queen. How could you not, by the way?
You can't help yourself when you hear that song.
But that's
amazing.
For me, that is, I think, one of the essential sides of that is how it can bring us together, how it can promote a resonance among people.
Yes, I love that. And I think that is the music. And I could make that argument for probably all of these art forms, how they can bring us together. I think that is the part of not feeling so alone, not only in the representation of what you're seeing as an individual, but that others are participating in that. Even when I was in the Met this last weekend, I'm standing there and I'm looking at a piece of art, and so are 7 or 8 other people. And we're all looking at these images, or we're looking at these sculptures and taking our piece from it, but all still in that collective joining. Music, I think, has a whole nother, because of the resonance, right? The vibrations that we can that we can enjoy together. Yeah. And the beat.
Yeah. And you're right. Absolutely. Because every photo, every image that would be in a painting or a photograph there's so much juxtaposition between light and dark and all of this other stuff that it causes its own frequency. And there are some images that could simply bring an entire crowd of people to the same level of tears.
Yes.
And an empathy and compassion for a particular movement. It's amazing how art could potentially bring us together.
Yeah. And also, and on the other side of that, I'm glad that you brought that up. I also have experienced, and I'll have to come up with a really good example, but experience when I see, I'll use images or photography as an example here, but I could say it with music, where I hear something and I'm like, oh, I don't like that at all. Like, I don't want to see that. I don't like that. And I get learnings about myself in that too.
Absolutely.
Right.
Not all art and it's not about, the thing is what can I learn about myself by what I am repelled by?
Yes.
And why am I repelled by that? What is it that is shocking me? What would I have, one of my favorite questions, what would I have to believe and or think habitually for me to feel that reaction as it relates to this experience?
Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. One of Mapplethorpe's images come to mind. I mean, he did, one with blood and semen in it. And I'll never forget seeing that and just being like, what is this? And I was like, wow, what is it about that I find just so repelling?
It's amazing how deep the conditioned thoughts of what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. I mean, it has been driven deep into our psyche. And we've talked about this before. It's not just in our own experiences in environment. There seems to be some growing evidence that this is stored in the memory of our DNA, even passed down from generation to generation. Yes.
And what do you do with that? This is the other side of it, right? And I love that what we're repelled by, and then what's the value of me looking at that? And I think that is the place where we can find our own vibration, in our own consciousness, where we are restricting ourselves in some level. Where we still have attachments would be the way that I would say it. And as we're trying,
reminds me of the 5 level of attachments from.
You got to it. I was waiting.
Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., who is the son of Don Miguel Ruiz of the 4 Agreements. I had to bring it in.
I know. I'm glad you did. I mean, we're going to do it. Without planning it. I mean, I think that's the
important part. But actually, to bring directly in, Don Miguel Ruiz in the 4 Agreements, he does talk about the dream of the planet and how everything we have, everything is made up. It was made up at some point, and what is true have been these agreements of what is right, what is wrong, what does something mean, there's all of these agreements, and we have so many agreements. We have adopted, we have been born into the existing dream of the planet.
Yeah.
And
it's like we were dropped down in the middle of the scene.
Exactly. And the question is how much of that are we willing to evaluate for ourselves of what we agree with?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. Again, that's what makes us the weirdos.
And that's what art is a great way of doing that. Let's talk about nature. Tell me about what you wrote about your experience with the mallard duck in nature.
Yeah. Well, there's a term that scientists have come up with, and it's our need to be in nature. And it's called biophilia.
Okay.
I just love how they can sanitize anything.
Biophilia.
Biophilia. Yeah. This call that we have to be in nature. And it's sort of interesting. When I was in New York, and I live in Oklahoma City majority of the time, the rest of the time in the summers, I'm in Michigan. And then here I am in New York City, the concrete jungle. You could name it easily. And then walking through Central Park and just noticing how I felt when I was not in the park, noticing how I felt in a full weekend of being surrounded by cement and very few trees at times, and the necessity for this park. And that someone identified way, way back in the 1800s that they should be preserving some plot of land for a park. And that people decide, we have Yellowstone. I was in Glacier National Park this last year, that we have all somehow realized that turning our entire world into concrete might not be a good idea.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. We started to figure it out. And so nature, I think I want to come back to that, verse in the Bible, I think that nature does show us just this way of existing, this way of not being so concerned with our ruminations about our life, right? How am I mean, the number one question we're always that's lurking back way in our consciousness is, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? Right. And so I think nature really helps us see that probably isn't necessary, and it's particular with the duck. And ironically, I also saw two birds bathing in the fountain at the Met this last weekend, and it was just so great. They don't care about my life. They don't care about my success. They'll eat bread out of my hand no matter what happened to me that day, right? Or no matter what I did that day or a year previously in my life. And I think there's just something with nature that can bring us back to that, letting go of the striving, and because it just doesn't care on one level. It's indifferent. There's a beautiful indifference.
Letting go of the care. There are a handful of things that come to my mind when I think about nature. First of all, I don't know the etymology of the word nature, but it reminds me of the word natural.
Yes.
Okay. So,
yes.
And I'm going to relate the two in my mind, even if there's no actual connection. And although I think there probably is. But the whole idea of nature is that it's natural, that it's not been carefully manipulated in some way to go in a direction other than what is its natural course.
Yeah.
And so there is so much, I mean, we can all identify, and here goes to that other word, beauty in nature. It's like, how can this actually be so beautiful without us intentionally trying to modify and or manipulate this whole thing?
Yeah.
And that is one thing that speaks to me, is just how left to its own natural bent, there's beauty there. Yes. And it's not chaos. Nature is not chaos. And that is the other thing. It's like, I was watching a 4-hour interview with Lex Friedman and his friend, I can't remember his name, in the Amazon jungle. And it was such a fascinating conversation. And they were literally in the depths of the Amazon jungle. And right as they're doing it, it's like, look, do you see that snake right there? And Lex is like, what? And the guy holds out his hand, and the snake just comes up on his arm. It's like, this is one of the most beautiful. And I'm like,
I don't think so.
Exactly. But this guy has been out in this natural habitat.
Yeah.
And doesn't see the story in our mind that I would make up about that experience. He has such an appreciation for the order that is in nature and its naturalness. And I love the idea of nobody here is really, striving for this or that. They're naturally being. Plants are naturally being.
They're being.
That's exactly it. And the other thing it reminds me of nature, and when you think about ducks, Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz talked about the fact of don't take anything personally. And one of the metaphor he gives is these ducks. He says, have you ever seen two ducks? Yeah, it's in the book. He says, if you've ever seen two ducks have a fight with one another, it's intense. Yes. It is absolutely intense, that fight. But as soon as that fight is over and they kind of just, move a little short, they don't carry any memory of that at all.
Yeah,
it's
and
gone.
He talks about that, and they shake off their feathers.
They shake off their feathers. Yeah.
And they shake it off, and
they shake it off and they move on.
I do remember that.
And they are back to their natural way of being.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. That I desire to have more of that. I desire to have more nature in my life.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is that I have often felt like this desire, a call, a pull to nature. And shockingly, there are times like, okay, I'm here in nature. I was like, but are there snakes here? And and stuff like that. Oh, I want to sit down and just enjoy this beauty. Are these ants going to bite me?
Well, we do have this. I heard this one. I don't know what show I was watching, but I did hear this woman who was a survivalist, naturalist. She could survive out in the wild by herself. And she did say to me, she's like, one of the impressions people can start to take on is that nature is out to get them.
Mm.
And I thought that was because I do have a particular relationship with snakes. I really do not like them. Like, I would never hurt one, but I do not want them around me at all. And I would probably go as far as to say it's some sort of phobia that I have around them, and which probably is in my DNA. Actually, I think it's sort of normal for us in some ways, but not everyone's afraid of snakes. So nevertheless, what she said, and I thought it was very helpful to me, is like, nature is not out to get us. Like, it's just doing what it does. And I thought that was so good. And it's like, okay, snake is not out to get you. Like, it's, yes, you could come upon it. It could get startled, but it's not intentionally seeking you out to hurt you. So that was helpful. I still don't want to be around them, but it was helpful.
Yeah. For me, I will say that I definitely have a phobia of snakes.
Yeah.
It was, if it's not in my DNA, it was certainly conditioned in me from the time I was a child. From my mom. She's like, snakes are the worst thing on the planet. Yeah. And the one thing that I can say, though, is a part of it is I recognize how much of just a lack of education of knowing what's the difference between a venomous snake and some people talk about a good snake. And I've like, yeah, that concept, I understand it intellectually. Internally, I can't imagine a good snake. And so for me, there's a part of me, and I will tell you, it's not a big enough part to take action on it, but there's a part of me that wants to become a little bit more educated about snakes.
Yeah,
and
I think that's fair.
To be able to go into nature. So, for example, there is a place that's just an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from my home. It's called Natural Bridge State Park. And I hiked up to the top of that by myself one day in the middle of the woods. And my mom's like, I can't believe you did that. There's copperheads out there, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah. And thankfully I didn't run into one that day, but they are on the trail. And since then I've become like a member of various different Facebook groups for this Red River Gorge Natural Bridge State Park area. And every day people are posting pictures of the various different snakes, some of them copperheads, all along the trail that I was on. I went back 3 weeks later, I started the trail, and I got in, and I'm like, I can't do this. And I turned around and walked right back out.
Yeah. So I want you to know I have a similar experience and have had, more so in living in Oklahoma. In Michigan, I know the snakes there. And there is a Michigan rattlesnake, but it lives way up north. It'd be very rare that you would see one. They're mostly just non-dangerous snakes. They're gardener snakes, And I grew up in where I grew up, I would run into them in the yard. I am very fast and would run the other direction. But in Oklahoma, that is not the case. They have water moccasins here and cottonmouth something. And I remember going, I love to go morel mushroom foraging, hunting. And I remember, and so there was one spring I was here and I told Bridget, my wife, I'm like, let's go mushroom hunting. People are posting about it. And we got out to the woods and then it hit me. They do have actually dangerous snakes here. Like, ones that really could probably do some harm to you. And I went way back up on the edge of the road. She's like, where are you going? And I'm like, I'm not going to be walking through the woods today. And we were not on a trail, by the way. So there's a part of me that, what's the word I'm looking for, that really mourns the fact that I have that experience as well. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I have such a strong desire to be in nature. And quite frankly, I'm less nervous about those things when other people are around. It's like wherever 2 or 3 more human beings are, that there's going to be less snakes. But for whatever reason, you can let them go ahead on the trail.
Regardless of that, for some reason I feel a little bit more confident. But even still, I'd like to go hiking through the woods all by myself.
Yes,
and I do. But places I like to go is where, I find myself, it's like, okay, let me go to a place where there's a hiking trail where lots of people hike, And there's groups of people who are probably far enough ahead that I can't hear them. There's a group of people far enough behind me, and people continually coming, a stream of people where I pass somebody every 8 to 20 minutes coming the opposite way. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm safe here because there's a steady flow of traffic because I don't think snakes are out hunting humans. I don't believe that.
So. I don't think so.
I only believe my current level of belief, and I'm ignorant about all things snake, but my current level of belief is that the only time we really run into an issue is if a snake is there just minding its own business and we are not visually aware that we're coming up upon one, and we get close, they get startled and feel like we're there as a threat, and they fight back. That's my understanding. And so
yeah, mine too.
I just, there's a part of me, it's like, do they make snake-proof socks that go all the way up to your hips so that I can walk in hiking in nature?
Hiking boots do help, for sure. Yeah, well, I mean, but
I'm like, I'm talking about like, I want Kevlar knee-high socks.
You can put gaiters. I'm sure they make them.
Anyway,
well, I don't want to skip over. So I don't want to skip over the part where you're like, yeah, there's like a little bit of mourning. Like you can feel, that there's a way that you're holding yourself back, right? There's this sort of barrier that's like, okay, if I could work through this to some degree, I would experience more of the freedom that I know I desire. Right.
And there, part of me is what I'm getting at is I feel like by having this fear, whether rational or irrational, that I am keeping myself from experiencing a resonance with a natural environment that calls to me.
Yeah. I hear that.
That I'm only safe in my protected home that has walls and barriers that keep nature out. And there's a part of me that mourns that. Yeah.
I mean, I can relate to that experience because I've had it. You know, I'm like, I don't want to. There was a sign one time in Arizona, there are rattlesnakes on the trail. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm ready to encounter rattlesnakes right now. Maybe one day I will be, but right now I'm not. And so I didn't go down that trail. I went someplace else. But I do relate to that experience.
Yeah. You know? I will say this, Daphne. I never felt so the most recent experience of euphoria was that time when I actually climbed I think it was like 600 feet up, straight up this mini hill or whatever, going up to Natural Bridge State Park all by myself. It was like, this is amazing. And then the next one was about a year and a half ago. Stephanie and I went to Sedona, Arizona. Again, out there's probably plenty of snakes. I don't know which kind. I'm glad I didn't do any research to find out.
That's right.
But we went to Bell Rock, and I'm literally climbing all up these things. Like, I wonder if I can get up to that level. I wonder how I could get up to that level. And I'm sitting there doing that. Yeah. And not a care in the world was given to what if there's a snake here. But
that's interesting.
Exactly. But so I do know that there is a potential within me to not hyperfixate on the potential danger and just explore. And thankfully, nothing bad happened, obviously. But I desire more of those in nature experiences is what I'm getting at.
Yes. And I think many of us probably do. I think that I know that I do. And I would say very comfortable being out in nature. You know, I've climbed mountains. I climbed Mount Rainier. I mean, that was one of the most awe-inspiring moments that I've probably had, not just the climbing part of it. The coming down was very good, a lot harder than people realize after you've already climbed up. But it is those moments of awe that you talked about. There's just these natural, I remember seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. And that there are just these things that exist in nature, and even snakes themselves. I don't want to make this whole episode's going to be about snakes now, but the beauty that they carry, the markings that they have and the way that they've been designed to survive and to be able to blend in. So nothing does hurt them. Unfortunately, we can startle ourselves with them when we come upon them, but there's just these again, I think the word is right, naturally occurring things. And I think that part of nature, not only the silence that we can find, and the calm and the peace that we can find when we are in nature, there's also the it is that where we can experience these moments of awe.
Yeah.
Where I think in our own consciousness, it pulls us out of our ego quite a bit, that we're so small, to just, we're a part of it, but our ego actually can have this moment of just kind of like, oh, I'm, up against this mountain range. I feel pretty tiny, and I think there's a real beauty to that. And then just the experience of awe, which scientists have written about as well. I think it comes back to what you were saying, the same resonance we have in music, with people. There's also this in nature, this oneness that we can feel at the same time, that we're small and yet a part of this whole thing. And there's a real beauty to that too.
There was an experience that I had. I was sitting right next to a field, and I had a profound experience with a tall blade of grass blowing in the wind. And this is one of those weird stories that I literally felt as though I was carrying out a conversation between myself and this one very tall blade of grass. Now, this one blade of grass was one in hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a million blades of grass in this field.
Yeah.
And it was probably about 9.5 to 10 inches tall. And it was just blowing just waving very so slowly and subtly. And I was sitting there at the edge of this field, and I just looked at it, and I'm like, wow, I am noticing you, and you stand out. And in a way, I'm like, I feel so much like this blade of grass.
Wow.
That I feel that I'm sitting here being blown and tossed forward and backward by the winds of everything else. I actually understand just how much of my life that I feel is within my control is actually just a part of nature's flow of life blowing me one direction or another. And I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by everything else, and it's all connected. And it's like just this profound conversation. And it wasn't words. It was just an internal knowing that myself and this blade of grass experienced oneness together.
Yeah. I think those are the moments that can come upon us when we allow ourselves to be in nature.
Yeah.
And see nature and the beauty that naturally lives there. Even a decaying, rotting log. I was walking through, there was a big storm in Michigan. I was walking through the woods, and just, it looked like chaos, right? The storm had just blown through, and I mean, pulled huge trees out of the ground. Branches were everywhere. And this one thing that had got turned over, this one log had gotten blown over, moved around, and I could see all the beetles and all the bugs inside of it that were eating it. And just the beauty in that, in this sort of what looks like decay, but all of this was going to get returned to the earth. All of this was being broken down.
I love that. You talk about the fact, so when you hear the words decaying and rotting, those sound like such negative terms.
Yes, they do.
But there is so much beauty in that decay and rotting log. It's like, this is, wow, the fact that it's a log means that it was a tree that had life for an incredibly long period of time.
Yes. It did.
And the cycle of that life of that tree came to some sort of conclusion, and it's been laying on the ground, and now it is breaking down and becoming nutrients and food. It's actually a thing of great beauty.
It is. And even the storm, and again, coming back to what nature, what all of these things can show us, I noticed how much resistance I had when I looked at the sort of all the detritus of this wind, these extreme winds blowing through, and how I felt all of this, like all these trees that had gotten pulled out of the ground, and people's homes were also very damaged. So, that's incredibly unfortunate and inconvenient. Nevertheless, no one died, there was no loss of human life, but I just noticed my resistance to that, right? My sort of like, not wanting to feel the reality that this is what happens, Like, this is the isness of living, that storms blow through, that what it looks like destruction, and it looks like there's this decay, it looks like there is this chaos, and yet it's a very natural thing to have a storm. And we have storms in our life that are also very natural, that
Yeah.
none of us will avoid. So, the
Well,
metaphors, I think, that I can take away from it,
and
and my own resistance to it.
And one thing I noticed, the one thing you said, and as a kind of a caveat, is that and no human life was lost. But
Yeah.
even that's a part of the natural part of it as
Yes.
well, and the
Yes.
loss of life in some way has beauty in and of itself. It is
Of course.
it is the same exact thing as that tree.
Yes.
Is there in so many ways, I think we've been conditioned that we as humans are so much above and beyond anything else in nature as far as an importance. And
100%.
I get that, but we're not above it. We are nature as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We are a part of it. We are. And I think coming back to my statement in the beginning, like, I think somehow some people figured this out, that like destroying all of it, we're only going to destroy ourselves.
Yes.
Right. I can get a climate change bend here in a second, but I think that's what there were people who were wise enough to see that's what we were starting to do.
Yeah.
Right. And why we probably don't want to do that, because it is all one thing.
Does this conversation, what are some takeaways for you personally? Like, as you have written this letter, as we've had this conversation to you, what's 1, 2, or 3 things that you'll be more intentional about moving forward with?
Yeah. Oh, great question. For sure. I think I have already pretty good, I'm going to call them habits around sitting still, and looking sort of in nature, whether it be in nature, whether it be through art, whether it be through writing, reading, the humanities, and looking closely at, how that pulls me out of some of society's, imposed norms. I think that part is good. I think the place where I can be more intentional, though, is looking at where my resistance comes up. Like, just when I talked about that storm, I can skip over sort of my aversions and not looking more closely at those, like snakes. And I think I loved what you said about, I think there's probably a call there to learn more about that, to understand more about that, because it's definitely a place where I have an aversion, and what is that about? So I think that's one thing through this conversation that we just had that becomes part of my intentionality. Where do I have an aversion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'd like to do is go on more guided nature hikes from park rangers who basically make their living walking through these wilderness trails. And obviously they routinely come across snakes. And I would love to just learn from them about how they come to a place of comfort about that, and maybe learn tips and tricks on how to be safe out there if I were to go hiking more and potentially on my own. And although I do recognize the potential dangers of hiking on my own and not having people with me, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
The other thing for me is just to be more intentional about being aware of the beauty that I'm surrounded by. And the one thing I can say is that I have learned since I've had this call to nature that I don't have to drive 2 hours to go be in a forest to really benefit from nature. I can walk outside my door and I can actually view trees that surround our neighborhood. I can actually see blades of grass that are coming up, and I can see wildflowers. I mean, I can listen to the sound of the birds singing.
Yes. Yes.
It's
I'm
just
so
like,
glad you said that. It's like right here. You don't have to travel.
The nature is there. The nature is out there. Just the beauty of the sky. That's it's like, sometimes I'm just dumbfounded by certain clouds. It's like, who came up with that design? That is beautiful.
I love that. And I think the take home that you just hit there is just being intentional.
Yeah.
Whether it be intentional about the music you're listening to, whether it be intentional about images that you're looking for, that you love, whatever that is. And I do things like, I know you and I both use Notion. I have a whole section in there of just art, just pictures that have called me, or artists that I love, and I've grabbed things off, the internet and put those in there, or things on my phone. I mean, I think there's just so many opportunities in our modern life to surround ourselves sort of with these images or music and nature in our own backyard that can be very helpful. So I like what you said there, just the intentionality to pay attention now.
Awesome.
You don't have to go anywhere.
So Daphne, we have an announcement about the next 2 weeks.
We do. So the next 2 weeks, we will be, I guess I'll just say we will not be doing 2 shows. I'm traveling. And so we are going to take the next 2 weeks off, and then we will come back on, what date is it? I do not have the date written down.
I can tell you. So I will be traveling next week as well. And then
that's right.
1, 2, and then we come back on October 22nd, Tuesday the 22nd. And that will be season 2, episode 7 of our podcast.
Excellent.
And episode 34 of the podcast overall.
I know, 34.
Yeah.
34 shows. It's gone so fast.
I know.
So, yes. So then we will be back on that date with more great, inspiring content.
What is your call to action this week?
My call to action is simply for people to join me on Substack.
Okay.
At DS Leadership Life, I continue to write every other week. I post an essay around really the transformational parts of living, what I would call bringing our awareness and specifically to the way that we can find our path through, it can be sort of opposing goals at times with our work life, and how we navigate that, how we take time to reflect on really the things that we do want in our life. Some people would call it work-life balance. I don't believe in work-life balance at all. I think it's a very false dichotomy. And instead, I like to write about the intention, how we come to our awarenesses and how intentional we can be when it seems like we have opposing goals, which oftentimes we do.
And how do they find that Substack?
It is, you can find me on Substack at DS Leadership Life.
At DS Leadership Life. And it'll be linked in the show notes.
It will.
Sweet.
It will. Yes.
My call to action is a brand new relaunch of a podcast.
Okay.
Episode number 1 just dropped last night. It's called Building a Life and Business Together.
Ooh.
You can find it at buildingalifeandbusinesstogether.com. It is a podcast with my wife, Stephanie, and the two of us reintroduce our origin story of how we built the business that we have today. It is a 2-hour long epic episode.
Wow.
But it is a lot of fun because we have reevaluated some earlier experience. We've told our origin story several times, but we've experienced some pretty radical shifts and transformations in our perceptions of ourselves and just life in general over the last 5 to 6 years. And since we last told our origin story, and new elements came out for us that we've never brought into the story before. And so it is incredibly powerful. And the entire purpose of the podcast moving forward is we are here as an entrepreneurial couple to support and encourage other entrepreneurial couples where there is a business in the relationship. So
good.
It is definitely for those who are like Stephanie and I. We both work together in our business.
Yeah.
However, it is also very much there to support where one person in the marriage is the entrepreneur and the other one is not involved in the business. And our passion is to help make sure that that business is not actually causing the partners in the marriage to diverge away from one another, but how the business can actually bring them together. And it's about building a life and business together. Even if you're not going to partner in the business itself, there can still be this shared vision. And that's our hope, is to bring a level of support and encouragement to entrepreneurial couples.
Well, very much needed. Very much needed.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to go back and listen to it.
Oh,
it is interesting, right? As you've lived your story, and then the years pass, and the years pass, and the years pass, how you get more. You just go through different frames.
Yeah. Basically, there are certain filters of how I would perceive things before. And some filters have been removed, new filters are there. And it's just like, wow, it's the same story, but I see it so much differently now.
Yeah, it's so good. All right.
Yeah.
So that's building a life and
together.com.
together.com. Okay, we'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome. All right. We'll see you all in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Until then, choose your own adventure.
Love it. Bye.